Hello, everybody. Here I am. Welcome to episode 4 of Learning About Learning with Jim. I'm Jim, and for the next 20 minutes, we'll be exploring the idea of how do you become an expert. I'm actually just gonna. This is kind of annoying in my ear. This thing. Just gonna take this out. I can hear my own voice. So how do you become an expert in something? That's the question for today. Am I an expert? Question I've been asking myself this week. I mean, what could I possibly be described to be an expert in? I had a look. Been playing quite a lot of Mario Kart lately. I had a look at how many hours I've played Mario Kart for. I've played it for 180 hours, which is quite a long time, but way off the kind of famous 10,000 hours for what it takes to become an expert. But I consider myself to be pretty good at Mario Kart. But that 10,000 hours, we're going to dig into that because that's kind of the most popular rule or, concept around expertise that you can find out there that I think everyone's familiar with. So we're going to be debunking that a little bit and digging into it and seeing what it means. I think we can also distinguish between having expertise and being an expert in something. So at my work, I feel like I have lots of expertise, but I don't think I'd necessarily class myself as a top expert in learning design. But yeah, I think it's also difficult to define in some fields and easy to define in other fields. Some of the studies that I've been looking at this week, in fact, almost all of them, look at expertise in musicians, in chess players, in athletes, fields where it's potentially much easier to see when someone is an expert. You've got, in chess, someone's a grandmaster. In sport, they're kind of at the top of their game, and musicians, maybe they play for some top orchestra or something. So it's easy to see. Whereas there's a lot of fields where it's not quite as clear as that. So if you're watching on the stream, let me know if do you feel like you're an expert in anything, or what expertise do you have? Let me know, and we can see who's out there and what experts we have. So the 10,000 hour rule, this is, like I said, the most famous kind of model rule, popular conception of what expertise means. It was popularized. Willie reckons he's more of a thought leader than an expert. Nice, thanks, Willie. We will get to thought leadership at the end, actually. Me and Willie had a little bit of a chat about this on voice notes today. And I have some problems with the concept of thought leadership versus expertise. So, we'll get to that. We'll get to that in about 10 minutes. But yeah, so Malcolm Gladwell wrote this book called Outliers. And in that book, he talked about the 10,000 hour rule. And I think the kind of the myth that's been popularized in our culture is that to become an expert at something, you just need to spend 10,000 hours doing that thing. Willie's played 6,000 hours of Dota, which is a computer game. I mean, see, look, you're nowhere near 10,000 hours. You're like 2/3 of the way there, and you are barely above average. So, maybe I imagine Mario Kart has a much shallower learning curve than Dota. So to be fair to Gladwell, in Outliers, his words have kind of been taken out of context to an extent. He didn't necessarily say all you have to do is do something for 10,000 hours and then you'll be an expert at it. But I think that's kind of what a lot of people have taken away from that. And this research is based on, Malcolm Gladwell's point around 10,000 hours is based on the research of a guy called Anders Ericsson, who was the original researcher for this kind of 10,000 hours study, and he actually kind of had more nuance in his research as well. First one, which he kind of addresses here. Obviously, it's not about just putting in the hours. Many people have interpreted the 10,000 hour rule as a promise that anyone can become an expert in a given field by putting in 10,000 hours of practice. But nothing in my study implied this. What he talks about instead is the idea of deliberate practice, which is a term you might have heard. So this is the idea of actively working towards gaining expertise. So you want to learn violin, you can't just kind of scratch away on a violin for 10,000 hours. You need to put in deliberate practice where you're kind of actively getting better, learning the things you need to learn to become an expert. And what this Ericsson guy talks about is that becoming an expert is about you build a mental representation of what expert looks like, of what being really good looks like, and then work towards that. So, long little quote here. He talks about expert performance can be largely attributed to the development of increasingly sophisticated domain-specific mental representations. So, as you get better and better, you start to understand more and more what being good, what being an expert looks like. You refine the mental representations to match the model presented by their coach or teacher. And this framework hypothesizes that engagement in this process over many, many iterations explains the acquisition of expert performance. So I've developed an idea of what it means to be an amazing Dota player, Mario Kart player, violinist, learning designer, whatever. And then supported by an expert mentor or teacher or coach, I can move towards that mental representation. But having an idea of what excellent looks like, of what expert looks like, is really crucial in becoming an expert. And as with a lot of these papers, there's a really easy to understand and cool model with boxes and arrows. But yeah, essentially here he's saying to get from, you have your deliberate practice and you develop these increasingly sophisticated mental representations of what being an expert looks like to move towards expert performance. I'll take that off because it's probably just going to confuse you more than give you interesting things to look at. So Willie's saying, I think that's it. When I'm playing Dota, I'm not training or trying to get better. I'm trying to have fun. Yeah, exactly. And I suppose there are some people, that's why we don't get better. Yeah, and I think part of my challenge with Mario Kart is now I'm the best person I know at it. So I am kind of the expert mentor. There's no one around me who's like pushing me to better, learn how to, use my red shells more effectively, sliding around corners better. Like, you're just having fun with Dota as well. So, maybe they're bad examples because we're not actively trying to be experts. But if we were, we'd have to change our approach. We'd have to develop that mental representation of what expertise looks like, and we'd have to find a mentor to support us through it. So Ericsson recommends active learning and thinking about what best performers look like. So focusing on this top performance and then doing rather than knowing. So he's quite critical of kind of a lot of learning at work and learning in school, which doesn't support this kind of deliberate practice. And of course, often, almost always at school and often at work, we don't have access to these best performers. So we're not being trained by the best of the best. Of course, because, most of us are just normal people and we don't have access to experts in their field. But that's kind of his point. So you need this deliberate practice, you need this mental representation, you need to be supported by an expert. This kind of all this reminded me of, I've got a little clip from Ira Glass, who's a legendary radio host and podcaster from This American Life, who has this quite famous quote about the gap. So needing to know what you're aiming at in order to become expert at something. So I'll play this. It's about a minute and a half.
Nobody tells people who are beginners, and I really wish somebody had told this to me, is that all of us who do creative work, like, we get into it, and we get into it because we have good taste. But it's like there's a gap, that for the first couple of years that you're making stuff, what you're making isn't so good, okay? It's not that great. It's trying to be good. It has ambition to be good, but it's not quite that good. But your taste, the thing that got you into the game, your taste is still killer. And your taste is good enough that you can tell that what you're making is kind of a disappointment to you. You know what I mean? A lot of people never get past that phase. A lot of people at that point, they quit. And the thing I would just say to you with all my heart is that most everybody I know who does interesting creative work, they went through a phase of years where they had really good taste. They could tell what they were making wasn't as good as they wanted it to be. They knew it felt short. It didn't have this special thing that we wanted it to have. And the thing I would say to you is everybody goes through that. And for you to go through it, if you're going through it right now, if you're just getting out of that phase, you got to know it's totally normal. And the most important possible thing you could do is do a lot of work. Do a huge volume of work. Put yourself on a deadline so that every week or every month you know you're going to finish one story. Because it's only by actually going through a volume of work that you're actually going to catch up and close that gap. And the work you're making will be as good as your ambitions. In my case, I took longer to figure out how to do this than anybody I've ever met. It takes a while. It's going to take you a while. It's normal to take a while, and you just have to fight your way through that. Okay?
So it's deliberate practice, it's lots of feedback, it's focus, it's taking the time. It's basically, obviously, it takes a lot of work to become an expert. So this deliberate practice idea, is that all it takes to become an expert? There's a paper that has almost that exact title, and they talk about how deliberate practice is necessary to become an expert, but it's not sufficient. So if all you have is deliberate practice, then you're probably not going to become an expert. And this study was great and kind of blew a lot of the 10,000 hours stuff out of the water. So they talk about how, so for age can be a factor. So they looked into how the factor of age for acquiring complex skills, and the younger you start learning a thing, which, obviously seems intuitive as well, the younger you start learning a thing, the better you are going to be at it. And bad news for people learning languages, a 2018 study that looked at 600,000 native and non-native English speakers found that native fluency in language learning is almost impossible if you start kind of after the age of 10, 11. So if you want to, that kind of really deep understanding of the, the grammar and all the terms and all the words and just sounding like you grew up with that language, that's nearly impossible to learn unless you start super young. But thankfully, it doesn't matter if you've kind of accepted that that's never going to happen. It doesn't matter how late you start, really. So if you haven't learned that language that you want to learn by now, accept that you'll never sound like a native, but might as well start now, because you're going to get as good as you can get no matter how old you are. In this study as well, they were looking at chess. Like I said, a lot of these studies look at kind of chess masters as a model of expertise. Contrary to the 10,000 hour rule, they found one person became a chess master after 26 years of study. Another person became a chess master after just 2 years of study. So I'm sure there are all sorts of different factors in there, but that kind of, I think that fully debunks this 10,000 hour idea. Like, it could be just a couple of thousand hours, or I mean, who knows what 26 years is? That's like 26,000 hours. But I think what this kind of illustrates is that not everyone can do everything. So their kind of conclusion, they say this runs counter to the egalitarian view that anyone can achieve most anything he or she wishes with enough hard work. So that kind of saying that you hear a lot, you can do anything you put your mind to. Maybe you can't. Maybe some people aren't predisposed to be chess champions. Other people are just never going to be like top flight footballers or world champion Dota players. The silver lining, we believe, is that when people are given an accurate assessment of their abilities and of the likelihood of achieving certain goals given those abilities, they may gravitate towards domains in which they have a realistic chance of acquiring expert performance through deliberate practice. So not everyone can do everything. Not everyone can become an expert in everything. But if we figure out what we're likely to become best at, what we're most likely to become an expert at, and kind of pursue that, then we're much more likely to be an expert. Question from Swelling: is expertise always relative to other people's level? Yeah, that is a really interesting question. I think it kind of comes back to this this point that I made at the start, where often the studies around expertise look at things like athletics, chess, and music, where there's quite a kind of almost objective measure of what expertise means. You're a chess grandmaster, you're first violin for the Berlin Philharmonic, you won the Super Bowl, where it's kind of quite easy to assess whether someone's an expert or not. Whereas in a lot of other fields, it's difficult to define expertise, because they're kind of, well, certainly, in my field, learning design, creating learning programs, it's quite fragmented, and there isn't really like a body that assesses how good things are. It's all kind of on a project by project, individual basis. But I don't know, Svenning, follow up with that comment. What do you think about expertise being relative? I kind of imagine in all fields there's some kind of objective measure of what expertise looks like. Like, to be an expert designer, there's a certain set of skills and competences that you have that make you an expert. Or if you're an expert baker, there's some kind of set of skills that exist regardless of other people. But saying that, I suppose it also depends on the field. Like when bread was first invented, the people who could make a basic loaf were experts, because that was the absolute top of their field. Whereas now things are much more complex. Perhaps the understanding of expertise will evolve. So there's stuff. How do you become an expert? Kind of coming towards the end of the sesh. How do you become an expert? Things we've covered. So choosing the right thing. So choose the thing that's appropriate for you to become an expert in, something that is right to you, that kind of plays to your strengths, that you're interested in, because as Ira Glass said, it's going to take time. So take your time, take the kind of long view, you're going to put in, whether it's 10,000 hours, 2 years, 26 years, put in the hours of deliberate practice. So deliberately trying to get good at this thing. And that should be kind of focused work as well. Like we talked about, I think in episode 1, you need to focus when you're working on something. You can't kind of expect to become an expert marathon runner whilst you're also watching kind of Love Island on the TV at the gym. It needs kind of total focus. And then this mental representation point. So build a clear picture of what expert looks like so you can move towards that. And then to help you move towards that, you need to find experts and mentors. So be guided by experts and mentors towards that mental representation of what expert looks like. A little side, wow, I'm absolutely bright. Another little side note, you need to sleep to become an expert. I found one paper on the role of sleep in the mastery of skills, and REM and non-REM sleep correlate with people learning skills faster and kind of embedding those skills quicker. So make sure you sleep if you want to become an expert in something. Final point on the thought leaders, as William mentioned at the top. I think whilst you need to be guided by mentors and experts, beware of thought leaders. I think there's the Dunning-Kruger effect that we talked about in episode 2, where a little bit of knowledge is a dangerous thing because it's easy to think that you're an expert in something when actually you're not. Easy to feel like an expert when you're at this peak of Mount Stupid, and actually, you've got a long way to go. And I think a lot of the kind of thought leaders around in the business world, in the world of work, give us this feeling that we can be experts in something very quickly. But I think the role of thought leader is somewhat problematic. Anyway, I found a great blog called Without Bullshit, talking about thought leaders and the kind of inherent problem in thought leaders, because what this person says, a thought leader is a person who's created a coherent body of ideas and is effective at communicating and spreading those ideas to an audience they want to influence. So the incentive of the thought leader is, rather than creating a body of ideas that are correct and verified and kind of researched deeply, their goal is to create a coherent body of ideas that kind of sound interesting, connect with people on an emotional level, and can help them sell their books or make a lot of money doing talks. So what this person on the Without Bullshit blog talks about is what a thought leader might be onto something. They might have discovered some amazing truth that no one's ever seen, but they also might have like stumbled on some incredible falsehood that no one's ever seen. Because thought leadership, they say, selects for newness and uniqueness, not truth. It's kind of necessarily going to be wrong, going to be full of wrong ideas. So I think when you're moving towards expertise, trying to find someone to coach and mentor you, be careful of who you select as the experts you want to follow. Remain critical, do your research. And I think this kind of point around finding mentors and experts to help us develop our expertise is the thing that's most challenging in a workplace, because you often won't be able to choose your colleagues or the leaders supporting you. So trying to find people whose work you respect to mentor you, or getting into an organization where they're doing amazing work and you can learn from people. It's something I definitely find difficult as a freelancer or as a contractor to, when I'm often brought in for my expertise and I'm the most knowledgeable person on that subject in a project or organization, it's often hard to, find a way to learn new stuff. But I think that's kind of one of the big challenges of anyone wanting to develop expertise, is surrounding ourselves with people who know more than us. So that was how you become an expert. In summary, you've just got to do loads of work, put in the time, and surround yourself with great people. Thanks for watching Series 1, Episode 4 of Learning About Learning with Jim. Nice to have you here. Thanks for your comments, Willie and Svenung. And I'll see you next week. Haven't chosen a topic for next week yet, but I'll give it a think over the weekend. Hope you enjoyed it. See you next week.